From Oregon, we have A.J. McCord, and from Kentucky, we have Kendrick Haskins. We'll turn things over now to A.J.
Thank you guys for being here. Sorry we're holding you up from lunch. We'll try to make it quick and informative. So like you mentioned, I'm AJ McCord. I was the 2021 Oregon Sportscaster of the Year. So we figured we'd start just sort of introduce ourselves, and then we're going to go into just a few touch points on social media because it is an obviously absolutely necessary part of the job today, whether you're a sportscaster, whether you're in talk show, if you want to do opinion, whatever it is a part of what you are judged by and at this point in time. And there's some pitfalls that I think we've both learned throughout our career, but there's also ways to harness that in a really, really great way. And so for those of you who are younger than us, we're actually learning about social media from you, but hopefully you can also learn a little bit about just how it impacts the workplace and the impact that it can have on your career from us.
And I'm Kendrick Haskins. Like I said, I'm the 2021 Kentucky Sports Broadcaster of the Year. I've been in the business for going back to internships since 1996, so I'm up there. And so I can remember when social media first came along and broadcast, or at least my TV station would block those websites at first, and then they got word that, oh, this is the future, and then all of a sudden, do this, do that, do this, do that. And so, it's been a learning process, and I think it's still a learning process, even for you guys, because we were talking about it earlier. You all have grown up with this, and I'm a little bit past that, so I can remember the advent of it. And so we both of us kind of trying to want to give you just, clues to how to navigate through this world, because it is a very vastly different world that we're living in right now, and social media can be the good part of it and the not so good part of it. And I guess I can start off with, so we the way it works with us at my station, because your experience, which you told me, is totally different from what we had to deal with. They were big on Facebook. Our station was big Facebook. But as you all know, because most of the younger ones in here, most of you aren't really doing Facebook. It's Twitter, it's IG, and it's TikTok. I still haven't gotten to TikTok. But one of the things they wanted us to add, our station wanted us to add, I'm Wave 3, so at Kendrick Haskins, Wave 3. I did it, but like most things that happen with our station, it's really hot for like a hot second, and then they move on to something else. You don't have to put in Wave 3 to find me on my Twitter page. But one thing, I use Twitter as a great source of news. As an anchor, one of the things I do first, and one of the things that also can be a little bit more stressful thing, is going on there. I have a 6:20 hit, and I go on at 6:15 to make sure I didn't miss anything, and lo and behold, there's something there. So usually that becomes a mention, and hey, this will be on at 11. And so I use Twitter for that. For Facebook and IG, I kind of do show some personality, but I'm very guarded on what I show personality-wise as far as personal life. Now, if personality is showing how I can be goofy, how I can be funny, all that, that's one thing, and I monitor that too. But as far as too much my personal life, I try not to show too much of that.
So I came from local television as well, and I think that that's something that I learned really on my very first station. I had my own Twitter because I had started it in college or whatever it was, but then my very first station, they had you start a station Twitter account. So at first it was like, okay, yeah, that's fine. Well, then you go to leave that station however many years later, they actually own your social media account. Like, they owned the account that you created. And so all of the work that I had put into building a brand, building a platform, all of this stuff was now no longer mine. I had to give it back. So I had to essentially go back to the one that I started in college, had abandoned 3 years ago, whatever it is. So I think as I've gotten in my career, I've gotten a lot more understanding and a lot more critical of the role social media will play regardless of the job that I have. And I think that is I've moved into full-time freelance work. And so now I'm in even a different space of I'm not monitored, for lack of a better word, I don't have to adhere to station policies, which is something that we're going to talk about. But, you have to decide what your voice is going to be on social media. And like he mentioned, what you do on Twitter, probably really different than what you do on Instagram, probably really different than what you do on TikTok. But there's a way to have your brand identity translate to all three of them if you utilize them the correct way, or like the best way, I guess I'll say. And so I'm similar in that my private life is pretty much off of social media, right? Like you don't know if I'm married, you don't know if I have kids, you don't know typically where I live. Like that's just not a part of the thing that I want people to know when I share what I would share on social media. But you are going to see my face. You are going to feel like you know me. You just don't get to know like my life, if that makes sense. So I think that as you go into this industry and in social media, you have to think about how you're going to portray yourself and understand that it is a portrayal. But you do sort of enter a contract with like an informal contract with your followers, right? Because they're following you. So they want to know what they're going to get when they get you. Are you going to get everything? Like I always felt like once I sort of tiptoed into that, okay, I'm going to share about my family, I'm going to share about my husband, I'm going to share about my dog or whatever it is, I felt an obligation to sort of keep that up, if that makes sense. Whereas when I just didn't start, when my husband never made it on my social media, then it became okay, I don't owe y'all anything. I don't owe you an explanation, whatever it is. So I think social media is a really personal decision for a public profile, if that makes sense. And you have people across this industry who use it entirely different. And there's no right way or wrong way. There are just consequences with every way, right? So I think that that's sort of the background that I'll give on like my own social media usage. But I think one of the things that I really want to like harp on, I guess, is that it is a really powerful asset for your career. It's not something to be afraid of. It's not even something necessarily to be afraid of making a mistake on. You just have to be aware of the mistake that you're leaning towards, right? Like there are mistakes that are unforgivable in social media. There are careers that are ended because of what something has gotten out on social media. There are also careers that have been launched. There are also personalities and journalists who have become known because of the way they tweeted at an event or at a protest or whatever it is. And so there's a lot of power in social media. It's just about harnessing it and having a lot of intention with the way you choose to use it, I think.
And obviously, you and I are lucky because your husband and my girlfriend don't worry about us being on social media. That's relationships is a whole other thing to navigate on there. But one of the things I pointed out because we got a new general manager, and they're always plugs stuff to the website, plugs. And I don't know if you all have gotten out into the world, and I get more social media interaction when I just do it myself and don't put it towards wave3.com. And they don't like to hear that, but it's the honest truth, and I have a bad habit of being blatantly obvious. But that's one of the things, though. You put I put my work on there, and you get so much more interaction on there. And but going back to what you were saying about the social life, I know right now off the top of my head a reporter who works in a smaller market who's very talented, very good, but her social media is a train wreck. and it's one of those things. I don't know for sure because I'm close enough to her where I can talk to her, but I don't know what's happened when she's gone to interviews. But I know that she's interviewed in bigger markets and jobs that I feel like she was qualified for, and she didn't get those jobs. And I'll go to my grave and some of the stuff she does on social media is part of it. And it's not like she's like, flash or anything like that. She just does stuff that's very immature for someone of her age. So be cognizant of that, of what you're doing, because like you said, when they're in that final decision-making part of hiring, best believe they're going into your social media and they're going to go back. And so you got to be cognizant of everything that you do.
And I think too, it's not just like I said, it's not just in a bad way that they look at social media, right? Like, oh, you want to cover the NBA? Well, what have you tweeted about the NBA? Like, what are you bringing to the coverage of an NBA game or a WNBA game or whatever it is? People will go look at your socials. And I've had my agent tell me, especially as I move into this freelance, he's like, I want to see you be engaged on Twitter, on Instagram, with these athletes, with these games, bringing your voice to it, because now this is my primary platform, right? Like I don't have the 6 o'clock and the 11 o'clock news for people to see what I'm bringing to the table. this is it, which is a really good thing. And it's also a really intimidating thing, right? Because now you got to put it out there for the entire world to see. So one of the things that we wanted to talk about is there's obviously a difference, right? Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. And I think for my generation, your generation, TikTok is for sure the most intimidating one to understand how you can utilize it to fit in with your brand and at the same time stay relevant, because my passion is basketball, and those I have a lot of sports, but basketball primarily, that is a really young audience, right? And they're going to get reached on TikTok. And so I was trying to figure out, how do I stay relevant on TikTok without dancing? Because I don't really care for everybody to see me dance, like, not because I'm not good at it, but because it's none of your business, okay? So one of the things that I wanted to highlight, this is Katie Winge. She is the Denver Nuggets sideline reporter. She also does analyst. She played basketball. She's a boss on multiple levels. But this is her TikTok. So I'm going to show you this one. Okay, so this is when the Warriors and the Nuggets were playing.
Okay, let's start with the handles from both Talon. Watch the way it takes when he's going to go up, and then boom. Quick change of speed and change of direction. Blows right by, plays up, and what a move from the rookie. Nikola Jokic gets a post up against Draymond Green. Watch Green fall for the shot fake. Nikola, mid-cycle, rinse, and repeat. Up, under, and around against one of the best defenders in the NBA. This was the play that sealed the deal for Denver. Two-man game, Morris, Nikola Jokic to Will Barton, who was down and ready to shoot in the corner for Denver, which you always have to be when you're playing with Nikola Jokic. But Joker does such a good job of drawing all the defense in and then makes a smart play. This is where I was sitting, taking in this huge basket. Will the Thrill putting on a show that put the Nuggets up 5 with about 8 seconds remaining. Nuggets in game 4 against the Golden State Warriors. Those were 3 of my favorite moments from that game, for sure.
That was one, but then the one that I actually wanted to show you is 3 of my favorites. She breaks down, here we go, this one.
I have been seeing people go crazy over this Nikola Jokic clip, and rightfully so. He clearly calls out the Warriors are going to be looking for a lob in this side out of bounds play, but he wasn't the only one that knew that this was a potential scenario. The entire Nuggets team had watched this exact play earlier. Okay, so let me explain. This game is from the regular season, Indiana and Golden State in overtime, and that's the exact same play the Warriors tried to run against the Nuggets. Here, Andrew Wiggins, lob up, and he gets a tip in. Nikola Jokic joked after the game that the Nuggets might watch the most film out of any team in the entire NBA. And then Monte Morris post-game specifically mentioned that clip, that Pacer Warriors clip, as something the Nuggets have watched in preparation for this playoff series. So the Nuggets, great job scouting. They knew what was potentially going to happen, and then they covered it perfectly, switching and communicating through. No, but really, in particular, Austin Rivers. Watch the way he switches on to Andrew Wiggins here, and then gets positioning to prevent the lob and gets the steal. A huge defensive play for the Nuggets.
Okay, so that is one of the things that, like, when you think about how you can use TikTok, right? Like, I talked to Katie after that because I was like, girl, that is it. You have, like, figured out how to carry over your brand to TikTok. And what that was is she's in the post-game press conference after the game, right? That was obviously a big play in that game for the Nuggets to know what the Warriors were going to do. And Monte Morris is like, oh, this is why we knew this. Nikola Jokic says, yeah, we watch a lot of film. So instead of translating that in broadcast, right, you would take that and that would be your soundbite for the 10 or the 11. But on TikTok, what she did was instead she pulled and paraphrased what they said while showing you the play that happened that night, but also the play that taught them that they needed to prepare for that night, right? And so I think that's a way that as you figure out what your brand is going to be, as you figure out what your voice is going to be on social media, Katie is one of the ones who I think does the absolute best job of making sure that she, shows you who she is. She gives you a little bit of personality, but she also never gets to the point where, like, she doesn't cross any of her own boundaries, if that makes sense.
I mean, that's another example of where you can learn from other people. And going back to like some of the other things that's been discussed today, not just in this conference, is that learning from each other and learning from your peers. I mean, because that right there, I mean, that's as informative as you get, and that's something that, you know, she doesn't care if you take that from her. I mean, you take from people that you learn from people, and that's one of those things. And with social media, like I said, we're all still learning, even though it's been around for about 15 years, I'd say. About 15 years now. It's still a learning process, even for you all who have grown up in it. And you know, there's scary tales out there, but I don't want to sit here and make it all doom and gloom, because like I said, there's great stuff with it, like what she did, and like I said, with some of the stories that I've been able to get out there, because the engagement from it, and somebody else can learn from that, and what you can learn from other people, and especially, like I said, Twitter has been a gold mine as far, because nowadays, especially with college athletics, you'll learn. They even though we cover them every day, they will break news through a national thing, and we'll get it through Twitter before we'll get the email. And so that's what the thing is. You can use social media as a tool, as well as being cognizant of what you're doing.
Do you have anything else? Should we do questions? Let's go to questions. Okay. Anybody have any questions? Yeah.
Yes. My first question was just how I guess that obviously social media is like very competitive with like just trying to get information like out there. Like a lot of people are, you know, it's very saturated, the spaces. And just how would you recommend like trying to grow like a Twitter or a TikTok? Like obviously you want to, you know, put your own spin on things, but is there anything else that you like recommend like promotion?
So one of the things that I have found a lot of success with is the interaction, right? Because there's a lot of times that like I became friends with Chris Haynes, who breaks a lot of NBA news, right? And so I will see what he posts on his social media, and then I'll add my take to it, whether it's who the Blazers drafted on draft night, and I'll say, oh, this is why he's such a good fit for the Blazers, or whatever it is. So I think there's ways to bring your voice, but the whole way you grow your audience, right, is to introduce yourself to people who may not know who you are. And like Chris has a massive following on social media, and so I can introduce myself to some of his followers via my own voice and interacting with him. Does that make sense?
And being active, just a simple thing as being active. Of course, there is a fine line between being active and being overactive, because I tell people, I've got people that, I know people that are constantly tweeting. I'm like, when do you do anything else? So there's, and you know how it is when somebody's constantly tweeting, it becomes white noise, and you either block them or you just scroll right past. I don't have time to block people. I just keep scrolling. But so there is that fine line. But being active, and like she said, comment on somebody with a huge following. Now, I'm not one that says go out and argue with these people, but commenting on them and giving your opinion and having a smart opinion, people are interacting, and that's how you introduce yourself to people on social media.
And the teams too, I think. Like
Yes.
the Blazers, I commented on their stuff all the time when I was covering the team, and that introduced me to Blazers fans, right? Which is like who I was trying to tell, hey, I'm covering your team, you know? So I think that's a really good way to do it.
So you talk about like the white noise, and sometimes you have a lot of content like what I do for the week, and I may try to prep things that I want to do so I can post it throughout the week. So I always have to be worried about, dang, I can't record something today. Do you guys pay attention to the algorithms? Because I know like TikTok has a certain algorithm, or Instagram, or Twitter, or you kind of just post whenever it's relevant to what's going on.
Well, for myself, I post, if I have something to say, I post it. If I don't pay attention to algorithms, and I mean, if I've got something out there that I think is interesting that people may interact with, then I post it. I don't worry about all that other stuff.
I think for like some of the evergreen stuff, I'll try to pay attention to like, I don't, you know, is Tuesday at 11 a.m. Probably a better time than like Monday night at 11 p.m. Pacific, right? Because everyone is on East Coast time. So that's the only thing that I pay attention to in terms of times that you post is like, if it's evergreen, then yes, maybe I'll like control when I post it. But if it's happening right after the game, if it's happening in the moment, then you post it. And at the end of the day, those algorithms change so often that unless you have a social person who's telling you, okay, great, you created X number of posts, you batched your content ahead of the week, here's the time that we should do that. I think it's just, I do think like the timing of it, right? 7 o'clock versus 11 a.m. I think that matters a little bit when you're talking about evergreen posts. But for actual news or stories, like I'll boost a post-game story the next day at 11 a.m. because some of the people went to bed, especially if the team lost, right? So like they don't stay up to read your post-game, but then you boost it at 11 a.m. with a new hook, and that's the only way that I paid attention to the algorithm.
And like what you're doing when you're doing prep, leading up to it, I don't really think there's too much of a time frame leading up to it, because you're putting in the work, and once it's ready, you want to get it out there because you want to get as much information out there before whatever you're covering. You want to get it out there. So I think just getting that out there, and of course, you're going to get more engagement at certain times of the day. I mean, that's just common sense. But when you're doing prep and stuff like that, I think you just get it out there.
With all the political and social issues that you tend to get like, what are your thoughts on sportscasters blaming Americans on Twitter? I've been seeing quite a few just the last 2 days on Facebook and saying, oh, I'll unfriend you if you believe in this.
All right.
What are your thoughts on that?
Like, if you're Jamel Hill, you can do that. If you're the weekend sports anchor at the NBC affiliate in Louisville, you probably need to chill out a little bit. Like you said earlier, it's like they don't tune in to know who you voted for where you went to church. At some points, you're human, and sometimes it does get to you. But you have to monitor it. And I say I know some friends. I have friends that voice their opinions on stuff, but we actually do have a policy that you're supposed to chill out, and so it's easier to not comment when you know that you're not supposed to. But sometimes it is hard.
Well, and I think too, like he said, like Jamel Hill, right? Like there are people who are their own brand on social media, and that has a different set of standards than, like he said, weekend sports, right? Like there were company policies for the stations that I worked for in terms of what you're allowed to express your opinion on. That said, I do think it's important to remember that even when it's a political conversation, the athletes you're covering are also human beings. And so if they're sharing their thoughts, then there's no harm in boosting that, right? Like if I'm covering, you cover U.S. women's soccer, then there's nothing wrong with reposting Megan Rapinoe's comments from that day. You know what I mean? But you do have to distance yourself based on station policies, based on, again, your own brand. How much do you want people to know about where you stand? Because for better or for worse, they're going to know where you stand, and that's going to open you up to, whatever it is.
I've got an online publication, so I don't like to get too political or opinionated here and there. I think it's probably safe that I don't. All I like to do is deliver information, which is probably all in your wheelhouse. So you find that there are certain times where there's, especially on Twitter, Facebook, you know what, when you have a lot of, we actually find that our Facebook numbers for our website are higher than Twitter. And Twitter, to me, I don't know if you would view this as a crack tape probably more than anything else, because you don't know it's a numbers game. But are there any particular times that you find would be more favorable to post on Twitter than at any other time? I don't worry about the other stuff. It's all in against any general information support and all that.
I think if it's around a game, the best time is when the game is happening, right? So like if it's an event, then that is. But from what I've found being on the West Coast, which is different than being on the East Coast, is I've found that like 11 a.m. Pacific and that like 10 to 11:30 window is pretty good, because you're catching the West Coast still, or even like I would say 8 to 11 on the West Coast. You're doing a pretty good job of catching the people who are waking up on the West Coast, but the East Coast is about to take lunch, right? So like that's how I try to think of it, is like how are people going about their day? And so 8 to 11 Pacific a.m. and then again like 2 to 5 Pacific is typically pretty good, but that's just based on my own anecdotal experience. I'm sure there's an algorithm that has an actual answer for that. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yep. And honestly, I will Google sometimes. Like during the week, it'll be like, what's the best time to post on Instagram? there is a new story every single day. Someone has done this work, someone knows the algorithm of the week, and they will sometimes, if I'm getting ready to post something and I know it doesn't matter when I post it in the day, quick Google, hey, what's the best time to post? Oftentimes that's what I go with. Who knows if it works, but it's nice to have someone else tell you.
But on top of that, I do broadcast in addition to the information. So I'm wondering, I'll do them live no matter what, because you know what, I'd rather get them out there. So you mentioned the word boost time, if I heard you correctly. So define what boost time is, and maybe like a backup time that's when you would follow up in case people are sleeping and whatnot.
Oh. So like I'll boost it the next day. So like if I have a post-game report or post-game sound, I'll put it out right after the game. But then again, the next day, I'll typically go to that 8 or 11 Pacific, 2 to 5 Pacific, and boost whatever came the night before that maybe Blazers fans on the East Coast didn't see because the game ended at 1. Does that make sense?
Well, kind of. At the time, you're saying at the time do it, and then if you need a follow-up,
Yes.
then that should be classified as boost time.
Yeah, yeah. Well, boost. I guess the way I'm using that word is just like boost it. Like it's not original, but I'm boosting it again to try and get it back in someone's timeline. Yeah.
So immediately after or before and
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
What are you all's comment engagement
Fun. What is our comment/engagement policy for social media? And that is something when I think we both talk about deciding what your brand and your voice is going to be on social media goes along with protect your peace and whatever you need to do. And sometimes that means you can engage, right? Sometimes I have time, I have energy, and I have confidence. Sometimes I don't. And then it's a quick mute, quick block, whatever it is. And sometimes if you have the audacity to say what you said to me underneath my mentions, I have the audacity to make sure that everybody knows it, because there are some things that need to be kept in check. And then there are some things that it's like, you are an egg and 12 numbers. You are not worth my time. You are not worth my peace. And so that's a mute, that's a block, whatever it is. But I think that took me a very long time because I am innately a people person. I am innately a people pleaser. And so the idea that one random dude on social media can say X, Y, and Z, especially when I got into sports talk radio, oh my gosh, I lost sleep, I cried tears, and then it was like, go back to this is a random person on the internet. They don't know me. They know AJ McCord, the sportscaster. It's not an indictment on me. They took an issue with my take, and even if they got personal with like the attack, it's not me. They don't know me, kind of thing. So I think it's very individual, and for me, it varies based on my own mood that day, and I give myself a lot of grace to say, today, I don't feel like it. I don't have the energy. I don't have the capacity. And then some days it's like, you know what? I know I did a good job, and I'm going to make sure you know that this is not appropriate,
Right, and one of the policies I have for myself is I don't go back and forth with someone who has half as many followers as I do. It might sound arrogant, but it is because one, they're trying to build their following off of arguing with you. And so I'm very cognizant of that. There's been plenty of times I've had hit delete before I hit send. Because, sometimes somebody does get under your skin because, you all know, we're all human. You could do something and get 100 compliments that are complimentary and nice. It'll be that one. And that's the one that you'll focus on. You'll totally ignore all the rest of them. But it's a thing. It's a self-control thing. And because I get on some of my buddies because I've got friends who've got way more followers than I do who arguing with somebody with like 5. I'm like, why are you arguing with this person? and like you said, there's always bots out there. There's always the eggs. There's always Daniel.784732. And you know that person's not real. And there's people who just like to agitate and want to get under your skin, and it is hard. And I'm not going to sit here and say it's not. And like I said, I've hit delete so many times. But like I said, I will not argue with somebody who has half it, and I don't even have that many followers. So if you have half of that, you're not going to be worth my time. I'm sorry. Back there.
One thing I try to live by is that I don't have to defend every argument that I'm invited to.
Exactly.
But as far as engagement video? Is it just a quick opinion or a take on something? If it's video, how long is the video? Is it audio? What are some things?
I think the best engagement I've got on stuff has been on stories, and it's like human interest stories, not as much as game raps and stuff like that, but like the human interest stories, the enterprising stories, the story on whatever kid, whatever he did, or if I did something goofy like a few years ago, it was the Final Four in Dallas, and Kentucky was playing in it. I grew up a huge Dallas Cowboys fan. I had never been to Dallas. And so we had time, so we did a story on me running around being a total fanboy at the stadium. I mean, I go running through security, and they weren't a fan of me doing that, but I go running through security, and at one point, I ran into Ernie Johnson. It was ironic that he's going to be here, and I was like, hey, I'm doing this really goofy story. Will you play along? And he did. And so that story, and that was, 2014. And like I've reposted it years later, and it's gotten just as much engagement as if it was breaking news. And it's like personality stuff does get a lot of interaction and engagement, and just good human interest stories. It's the stuff that people can relate to.
I think the other thing that I've seen do really well is I always think that at the heart of my job, right, I find it such an honor to be in the place that I'm in, whether it's in the game or in the locker room, talking with that athlete, covering that team. And so I always think that the posts that I have that do the best on engagement are the ones that bring fans there, in a sense, right? Because if they're following you on Twitter, they're probably not at the game, they're probably not in the locker room. And so I try to go back to sort of like the senses, right? Like, what do you hear? What do you see? What do you feel? What does it sound like? What does it look like? All of these things. So those are the things that I find do the best, is when you either bring the fan there, or like he said, the personality stories are always great, which is why I really think that I have really tried to get past my own discomfort with TikTok, because it's personality. And like, I'm a fan of mine, like I'm confident enough in my personality that if I show people, I think it's going to be fine. But it's hard to get past that discomfort and sharing it in a new medium, as opposed to, I did a story about Lambeau Field, same thing. I'd never been to Lambeau, run around like a fool, and it did super, super well. I'm like joking about the ice sculptures. So I think it depends, but those are the consistent ones: the personality, the features, and then the ones that bring people to where you're at are the ones that I've seen do really well.
And one of the things that's kind of a hard line to kind of toe to, and you can definitely speak on that, is at the games. It's because one thing that drives me crazy when I'm on is people who are at the game, they're tweeting like play-by-play tweeting. I call it play-by-play tweeting. And I'm like, you're not tweeting anything that I'm not watching right now. So if I'm at a game and I tweet something, I'll tweet something like something I saw a fan do, or something that happened during the timeout that you didn't see because they're in a break, like, Chris Mack, when he was at Louisville, that's a whole other story. But like one of the things something that he's done, and it doesn't have to even necessarily be something that's really like news, but it's just something different that you're giving the fan a perspective that they can't get because they're not at the game. It drives me nuts when I look on it. Louisville's on a 18-0 run. Yeah, they just said that on television. They did. If you're watching the game, they're on a run right now. So if they're on an 18-0 run, say something like X player on the end of the bench is doing this or whatever, something like that. I like to give them like color of the game that you're not getting just from watching the game.
Any other questions?
Y'all hungry? No. You all good.
Ultimately, with us all being content creators in some way or fashion, and there's like not anything new under the sun.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a tactic that you all use to avoid copyright issues or anything that?
We just got a whole hour-long copyright thing that we had to watch. Oh, I watched it. We've got policies that have gone, really and truly, if I abided by all of them, my job would be very hard to do. We've got policies about using YouTube video. Well, if you're a sports anchor, you're a sports reporter, you're reporting on a kid committing to a school, guess where your video's coming from if they're not in a major market. So there is that. It is hard to navigate around that. I always, if I post anything, if I tweet anything, it's original content. I try not to post anything that's from a broadcast, because while it may be okay, I don't have to deal with it. If it's original content that I shot or was shot by our station or Gray, because it's all fine under there, then I'm good with it. But if it's something on broadcast, like from NBC, or even though we're NBC, I'm leery about it. I'm probably good, but it's just easier just to use your own stuff.
Yeah, I think like that's part of the hard thing too in local sports, right? Is so many of your stories. Like I did a really good sit down with Damian Lillard a few years ago, and I cut a different version for television than I did for social media, because we used game footage in the TV version, because you can, but then I don't want the NBA calling me about, the footage that I used of Dame from their broadcast. So it sometimes affects the way the story gets told, but I'm with, like, the copyright thing is just not worth it. It's never been worth it, in my opinion, to, like, even come close to it. So I avoid it. But like, I mean, we saw Katie, right? Like she had some Nugget stuff. She obviously had game highlights in that, but she got it from the Nuggets, or she got it from YouTube. And I think that's a little bit different, because I think that's fine until someone tells you it's not. Sometimes forgiveness is easier to ask for than permission.
Oh, yeah. I live by that. It's easier to ask forgiveness than ask permission. And because like with us, so in my area, so we cover the ACC with Louisville, we cover the SEC with Kentucky, and the SEC, even if you shoot the game, they have all kind of, basically they own the rights to even stuff that you shot, which I don't know how that works, but they do. And so, like, if you do a story, if I want to go do a story on a player from them, I've got to go to practice and get into practice, and it's just easier to work around, or take video from Kentucky.
Practice is always safe.
Yes.
You can always use stretching video. They let you get all stretching.
Oh yeah, don't you love when they let you in, and they run in the same drills that every other team in the country is, and like, don't shoot this. I'm like, you're just running a route. Go ahead. I'm fine.
So I have a podcast, for example, and so a big part of having people on your show is reaching out to them via social media. And like you'll have great love with like Kristen Short's been on my show, or Joy Taylor, and like, okay, they're very interactive, while others aren't, because they get flooded with DMs.
Right.
So is there a certain approach that you would take that would help kind of reach that barrier? Because of course we get people that may not have the best intention of getting there versus someone that has a good intention. So do you have a recommendation how you approach that so you can kind of separate yourself?
We were talking about that yesterday. I have a cheat code with my podcast, because I do a podcast with Charlie Ward. So I'm just like, call your buddies and he can praise on guests. And then anybody from Louisville, I can just work on getting somebody from Louisville. But as far as that, I really couldn't answer, because like I've got somebody played in the NBA. Right.
I think when the podcast that I've been asked to be on, that I end up on, it typically takes a little bit to get my attention. So like what I've found has been pretty effective is finding them on multiple platforms, right? Because I rarely check my Twitter. I think even the message requests will go to my email. Like that's the setting that I have set up. Whereas the Instagram DM requests, unless I like click on the next thing where it actually shows you the requested messages, I never see it. So there's people that I'm like, oh, it's been 3 months, so it's not like an intentional thing, but the way I have it set up is Twitter is the one that sends me the email. And so sometimes it's just hey, I reached out to you on Twitter, wanted to follow up here. That's how I would phrase it. So it's not like hey, you didn't answer my Twitter DM, so I'm trying you on Instagram, but it's more of a just like, hey, I wanted to follow up here in case this was where you checked, a very gracious sort of approach to it. And like Joy Taylor's one of the best, but like there's so many people who want to be on podcasts, especially if they believe in your intentions, that I think it's the line between persistence and obnoxious is actually like kind of wide. You just have to, it's about your intentions and less about the frequency with which you message, I guess. Don't get me wrong, frequent can be annoying, but there's like, that's a wide line, yeah. So I went to a really small college that we didn't have TV broadcasts, but we rented cameras out. And so I would go to almost every basketball game and I would practice. I acted like they were up in the booth and it'd be like, oh yeah, thanks for sending me down to me on this, like, I mean, really, that's what I did. And like, I got to the point where one of the things I noticed, I watched a lot of other people's reels on YouTube because when I was trying to get into it, that's where a lot of people's reels are. Now they're, sort of locked on Vimeo or whatever it is. But one of the things that I noticed was there was a lot of reporters who, when they were at the live games, they had a segment showing that they can talk through a buzzer. And so I would wait until there's like 3 seconds left and we're just like waiting for the buzzer to sound. And then I would start my report that nobody was listening to because it was recording on a camera and there was no broadcast. But that was how I think reps are reps. And even if it's your phone, it doesn't matter, right? Like you want to get into sports, go to the games on your days off, which I know is like the worst thing ever. And I hate advocating for doing things on your day off. Protect your peace. But I think that if you can get to the games in any capacity, that's the best way. And then just watch it back. I remember having a story at a Blazers game and then seeing a national reporter do the same story, and I compared our hits, and I was like, oh, I see, I get why she's so good at her job. And so I think that's it. It's the reps, but the quality doesn't matter nearly as much. I didn't have a phone. That's going to date myself. I didn't have a phone that took great video quality, so it wasn't something that I could do, right? But now you can do that. So that would be the suggestion. It really doesn't matter if you're live. You act like you're live, and that's the rep.
I mean, just piggyback what she said, it's just reps, rep after rep. Because I remember when I first started doing live shots, I was nervous. I'd speak 100 miles a second, and it's just more than anything, it's easier said than done because it's what just slow down, It's slowing down more than anything, but it's just reps. I mean, like when you're doing your stand-ups, just try to knock it out in one hit. I mean, but yeah, it's just watch yourself, go back and watch yourself. I mean, I still watch every one of my broadcasts every time, and I've been doing this for a while now, but I watch every one, and I watch everybody and try to pick up off other people. And at the end of the day, with anything, it's just reps. That's all it is.